Welcome to My Forever Home, the podcast. I'm Frances Cosway and I've helped hundreds of people create forever homes. I can't wait to share the journey with you. So let's start. Welcome to My Forever Home, episode 4 of the Sustainable Homes and Living season. This week I get a bit personal and how sustainability is not just something I talk about, but something I truly believe in. And having lived in Europe, Amsterdam, Ljubljana and London for over 12 years, it is so ingrained in the daily life there that it also became a part of my daily life. It was common practice in Amsterdam to collect all your bottles, pack them on your push bike and take them to the recycling station in a street nearby. No one ever had a second thought about doing that. I can't see that happening here though anytime soon. My partner Neil, he lived in Paris for 7 years, so he also lived in a community of being more environmentally conscious. So when he and I were faced with building a new home, we knew we wanted it to be as sustainable and energy efficient as possible. We were completely aligned on that goal. We wanted a home and the whole site to be linked to our values of using less fossil fuels by creating a home that was energy efficient and also a healthy home for our children. So today I have Neil here so that we can chat through what we did with our home design, what we compromised on, and what elements we were determined to have in that we knew were going to make a big difference to our overall goal. Neil is super passionate about sustainability. He's Passive House qualified after studying and passing exams in 2017, and they are really hard exams. So thanks for joining me on the show today, Neil.
Thank you for having me.
It's good to sit here together and reflect on our home design together for the benefit of listeners today. And the whole premise today in this episode is how I built or how we built our own sustainable home. So let me start with, to sort of set the scene, when I look back, Neil, on our home design journey, one of the things that really stands out for me is how aligned we were on building a home that was as energy efficient as we could have it. And I'm really glad that we were aligned on that. But I know at the time it was really hard for us to find the materials, the specialists, the architects, the trades that really understood energy efficiency as we, I suppose, understood it from living in Europe. And I suppose that for me was a really big challenge for us. Just to set the scene for the listeners, we bought our block of land in Melbourne in 2013. So we went through the design process in 2013 and 2014, finally moving into the home at the end of 2014. So thinking beyond double glazing and remembering what we designed for our home back then, and the things have changed so much in that time, particularly in terms of materials and access to builders. So I suppose, what do you feel were some of the key challenges back then for us to achieve what we wanted to achieve?
Well, it's hard to believe that all of this took place nearly 10 years ago, but and the time's gone very quickly. But I think looking back on it, as we embarked on the design process in 2012, 2013 timeframe, the biggest problem was the lack of information. Back then, climate change wasn't as front of mind as it is with everyone today. And really, there were very few websites that had any detailed information on the things to think about when designing a sustainable, energy efficient home. And also in the industry, there were, as we found as we interviewed designers and architects, very few of them actually understood the principles or shared the concerns that we did. So lack of information was the number one challenge. Also back at the time, there were fairly few energy efficient products on the market, particularly here in Australia. And what was available was very expensive. So that also introduced a challenge in that having products with the right level of energy efficiency or the right level of insulation or airtightness or whatnot, they were specialist products that invariably were imported from Germany or somewhere, and they came at a price premium. The other challenge we had, of course, was finding the right builder. Uh, Builders are very adept at getting projects finished quickly and cutting costs and reducing budget where possible. But certainly back at that time, they weren't particularly focused on energy efficiency. So we struggled to find builders that had experience in the products that we were interested in and that understood the issues and were prepared to go on that journey with us.
Mm. And I suppose that actually reminds me of just our goal ultimately, actually, in a house that we designed and wanted to build before this one, using SIPs. And that was a really big disappointment for us, that we couldn't find. Well, that was really your domain there, that we couldn't find. Do you want to share that a bit about the SIPs?
Well, I guess there you're talking about the unit that we built prior to designing and building this house. So this is even further ago, what, 2009,
Yeah.
2010 time frame. And I think that was a great case in point. We weren't trying to build a mansion. It was a subdivide and a small unit on a subdivided block. But we thought that would be a perfect test project for designing and building an energy efficient home. During the course of my research, I learned about a product called SIPs, structural insulated panels, which is essentially a sandwich made of plywood on the outsides and foam insulation in the core. It seemed like a great product, very good insulation, structural properties, airtight, ticked all of the boxes. Uh, it was a bit of a struggle to source the product. I think at the time there was a manufacturer or an importer perhaps in Perth, and that was about it. But then getting local experience with installing the product and using the product, that's what killed it for us. We absolutely couldn't
No.
find anyone that had experience in the product or was willing to go on the journey to learn.
But then I think we found that, well, we thought that a couple of years later we'd be able to use SIPs. And I know we got really excited, or my reflection of it is that we got really excited about the prospect that we could build our forever home using SIPs, because the market had progressed a little bit more. But then my recollection is that it meant that we had to design a little bit differently, because you're designing for SIPs differently than you are with traditional, let me say, stick and brick. And we, again, couldn't find, there were more providers or more people that could build with us, but the risk was great because we didn't know what the cost was going to be.
The risk was greater anyway,
Mm.
and also there's the risk that at least in the Australian market, it's a relatively, or was at that time, a relatively unproven product. So we couldn't be completely sure that we weren't going to run into issues down the track
Mm.
with moisture or termites potentially. Who knows
Yeah.
whatever else it happened to be. So
Yeah.
that also made it a challenge, and not being able to find a builder or designer with the expertise in the product to be able to allay those challenges and or concerns and give us the confidence that
Mm.
it could be a feasible product here in Melbourne's sandbelt with white ants and stuff. We just couldn't
No, no.
go
And
ahead
financially, it was a big risk as well. But I
financially as
know
well.
that it was heartbreaking, really, because it's a proven product in Europe. But I know that that was a real deflating moment for us, particularly you, that we couldn't build with SIPs. Just quickly going back to your point about lack of information, I feel that the information is much better than what it was, and that there are resources, there's government resources, there's a lot of magazines now, that there's, so much more information available to people. Do you feel that that's the case now, that there's so much more than what we had eight to 10 years ago?
Oh, absolutely. when I think back then, when we were designing this house, I did come across mentions of the passive house standard here and there, but there was very, very little readable information that could be understood without having a PhD in physics. And that was a disappointment. It to me, remembering back at the time, it looked like there could well be something important, valuable in the passive house standard, but the explanations on the web 10 years ago were just terrible. Fortunately, that situation's changed. There's quite a number of good websites available, and I think being forearmed with the knowledge about uh, energy efficiency and sustainability and the various standards that apply in that space is something that all potential home builders should arm themselves with.
Mm.
You don't need to go and get certified in passive house or or whatnot, but just being able to be aware of what's important helps you to have meaningful conversations with your architect or your designer or your builder
Mm.
around what trade-offs can be made and where they can't be made because they're going to compromise
Yeah.
the energy efficiency aspect of the design.
And I suppose that leads me beautifully into the next thing that I wanted to ask you, which is what are the key parts of the home design and build that you, because you really, I'll just set the scene here for the listeners. Neil was really the key driver of all the research, the technical information, and really working out what are the things that we were going to have in our home, the makeup of the home to make it energy efficient. And there'll be no surprises that I was the one responsible for the interior design. So let me talk about the design and the build. So what were the things that you were not prepared to compromise on, that you felt would really undermine the integrity of the efficiency of the home?
I I think that it really comes down to two simple points. But the first one is keeping the summer heat out. When you go around the suburbs of Melbourne, we seem to have these endless suburbs with monument grey tile roofs and no trees. And it's really no surprise that they're heat islands. So first priority for me was keeping the summer heat out. And this means that the design of our home had to have proper window shading to keep the sun off the glass from the outside. The other thing that I felt was really important and was to have a white roof, or at least a colour of roof that reflects the heat of summer away from the roof cavity. On the flip side, of course, it is in winter. You want to be able to retain the heat. So there, it's again the basics: proper insulation, not skimping on just having the bare minimums to meet the star rating, but having adequate levels of insulation in the walls and in the roof. Good quality glazing, at bare minimum double glazing in Melbourne's climate, and I think there's probably an argument for even triple glazing, but at least having good quality glazing with low U values to minimize the amount of heat that gets transferred through the glass and the frame, that was important. The other thing that stuck out to me from my research and of course in the lived experience of living in different buildings around Melbourne is air tightness. We have dreadfully drafty homes on average, and this is just wasting energy. In winter, the the cold winds coming in through every crack in the walls and around the windows, so you're running your heating more. And in summer, the hot air's getting in, so air tightness is for me something that I just wasn't going to compromise on either. Finally, because we ultimately elected to go with a passive solar design, which is a slightly different set of principles to the Passive House standard. This meant a thermal mass was important, and that was something that we couldn't compromise on either. We were able to integrate the thermal mass in our current home through leveraging the slab and having tiles bonded directly to the slab. But this again has worked very well to help stabilise the internal temperature because we've got correctly designed shading on the glass. The summer sun doesn't hit the floor at all, so we don't absorb any heat there, and instead the thermal mass tends to pull the internal temperature down to the ground temperature, which is about 17 degrees in these parts, so it keeps it nice and cool. And then in winter, the winter sun, is able to penetrate, and it heats the slab. I think we cover about 60% of the ground floor area with solar penetration. That warms it up. It stays warm all day and all through the night as well. I can come out in bare feet on the next morning and feel the warmth of the floor underfoot. So keeping the summer heat out and retaining the heat in winter, they're the non-negotiables for me.
Yeah, and they were the non-negotiables in our build. And it's interesting that you talk about those principles. They're things that I talk about with clients a lot. But I think about when people come to our home and they think, oh, the heater's on and the heater's not on. Or they think the air conditioning's on in summer and it's not. And I think the most beautiful thing that I love about our house is it's temperate. Most of the year through, it's always a really comfortable temperature. And if we do need in those really icy mornings or those super hot days to put on any artificial cooling or heating, you put it on for about an hour. If that it gets to the ideal temperature that you want, and you can turn it off because the insulation is keeping that temperature. It's keeping the room at that temperature.
Well, I think that's a testament to just how well the house does perform. As I was preparing for the interview earlier, I was reflecting on how little we actually use our split systems. And heating is almost never. There's, I think, through the winter period just past, we would have had the heater on 3 or 4 times on just the coldest mornings. And as you say, you run it for half an hour, run it for an hour, and the house stays warm for the rest of the day. Same at the height of summer. It's really only on those hottest of nights where it's still 30 degrees outside at 9 p.m. You can't open the windows. There's no breeze. It's just too hot to get to sleep. So we put the AC on for a bit. It cools down quickly, and it's comfortable enough to sleep. But the important thing, I think, is that over the course of the year, we wouldn't run the system more than 10 times.
Yeah, I think that's pretty valid. But it's it's very difficult. I say to clients, it's incredibly difficult to describe what it's like to live in a home that is really comfortable all year round. It's such a nice feeling to not have artificial heating or cooling blowing on you to keep the room at a temperature that's comfortable. You're in the home and you live in it, and it just feels really beautiful to live in. I actually encourage clients who are thinking about going down this path to go and stay for a weekend in a passive house or a really well-designed passive solar home, so that you can actually feel what it's like to live and how comfortable it is to live in a home that is designed in that way. So I'll go to another point now. When I look back at the submission that we did for the Sustainable Building Award that we won in Bayside in Melbourne for the best sustainable home, it makes me realise just how much we did as part of the design that all worked together. Like, that was a really big submission, and all the different elements that we had to make the house what it is. So, as the expert that you are, what do you believe are the core elements of our design and build that make our home really energy efficient and comfortable? And I suppose you've alluded to that in the previous question, but I'm not sure whether there's something you want to add to that.
I think the main thing is no single element carries the whole load itself. It really is a combination of different factors that all come together to make sure that the home is
Mm.
comfortable year round. Now, with proper calculation and design, it's possible to optimize the balance of these factors so that you're not overspending or underspending in any particular area, and that the results are guaranteed. So the things that we're sort of thinking about, um, in no particular order perhaps, but the first one's good glazing. In a modern home, there's people expect plenty of light and good visibility to the outside. So we're going to have lots of windows, and that increases the priority on selecting a good quality glazing product, um, something that restricts the flow of heat coming in or going out through both the glass and the frame to a sufficient level. Glazing on its own, though, isn't going to work if the sun's shining on it, and it drives me nuts driving around Bayside Melbourne here. The number of new build homes that don't have eaves, and they have these huge windows facing west or facing north, and they're running the air conditioner non-stop during the summer. So good quality glazing, but always with the proper shading, and that could be via eaves. It could be purpose-built louvers or even trees in the right location, deciduous trees to keep the summer sun off the glass is just so important. The next factor, of course, is insulation, and insulation is great because it's probably the cheapest element in terms of the cost and installation towards getting good results. So, as a rule of thumb, in the Melbourne climate, the bare minimum I'd suggest is going to be R4 in the external walls and at least R6 in the roof. And that can be made of multiple layers, so it's hard to get levels of insulation beyond R2.5 in a standard 90mm timber frame. So we need extra layers on the outside as well. And the approach that we took in this house was to have as much bulk insulation as possible. Earthwall, I think, was the brand, but bulk insulation nevertheless. And then we clad the whole exterior of the building in a double foil-sided air cell wrap, which is kind of like an extra thick blanket around the outside of the house just to improve the insulation. I've mentioned air tightness before, but that's also critical, and at least now there's a range of products on the market to help improve the air tightness and get it up to a sufficient level. But coupled with air tightness is of course the need to bring in fresh air all the time, and that's where a heat recovery ventilator is very important as well. I've touched on light exterior colours. I'm a firm believer that one of the reasons homes are so hot, particularly in Melbourne, is because of the preponderance of slate grey tile roofs. So something that was really important for me that was that we have a light coloured roof. We have a flat roof in the house that we're living in currently. So I guess because it's not visible from the street, you could have any colour you like. We chose Colorbond Surf Mist. I think it was.
Yeah,
I
it
think
was.
it is.
Yeah.
Um, which is a near white colour, and really the the choice was to reflect the summer sun away. And then the last point that I think is part of the overall fabric of the home is the usage of the thermal mass downstairs. So we're on a concrete slab. It's not insulated underneath, um, which means that the slab itself will tend to sink to the ground temperature of a bit over 17 degrees. But by adopting the passive solar principles and getting the winter sun in, the thermal mass works really well in winter and summer to keep the interior at a comfortable temperature. But it's really these 5 elements working in concert together that make this house work as well as it does.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, that you can't just have one of these things and think you're going to have a really great energy efficient house. They've got to work together to give you the optimum result. I think the other thing I just wanted to raise here was that I feel that we were also really super attentive to the floor plan. We paid a lot of attention to getting it right. And for those of you who listen to me a lot know that I harp on and on about floor plan being king. And I remember you and I had a debate about, rooms that we felt we needed or didn't need, and very conscious of every extra square metre meant that, that was additional cost, and, everyone's working to a budget. But I wanted to share that I remember we had a really big debate about not having a second living room. We refer it to as our winter room now, but we'd never had one before. So I know your point, Neil, was, well, why do we need one? And we've got to get the square meterage down, and we don't need this second room. And I was absolutely adamant that we had to have it. We do have, I would say, is a large house, a large family home, but we use every single room in our home on a daily basis. And even that winter room, just being able to have a separate room that the kids can retreat to, or you often retreat to the winter room to play the piano or just have some peace and quiet, that having those multiple spaces that are going to be used was really important. And even though that's not an energy efficient component, it's also still part of having a home that's going to work really hard for you. But I think that it's a well-used floor plan. Every single space has been used and differently used. The room that was originally designed as a spare room became then a room for some home help we had. We had an au pair for a couple of years, so that room was used for her. And now it's, this additional room that we thought was going to be a waste is now Neil's office. So it's incredible. And this is what I always say to people, that you need to have spaces that can be flexible over the life stages of your home. And I suppose the room that was a bedroom, there was a spare room, and now is a study. It's been able to be flexible. And that's really important about getting it right as well. I think I also wanted to mention that we're really passionate about the site as a whole. And I talk to clients about this, that yes, you can have an energy efficient house, but then what's the point of then having, a concrete garden? You need to be able to look at the site as a whole, because again, it's all working together. We've got a native garden, and we put a lot of time and effort into making sure that we were using native and indigenous plants to the area, but also that our brief to our landscaper was, we don't want to see any neighbours, any structures. We want to be cocooned by our garden. And people will come to our home now that it's established and say, oh my goodness me, it's like walking into the bush. But we've also got things, so to be true to this overall energy efficiency and sustainability mindset, it wasn't just about the house in isolation. So a native garden, we've got veggie patches, we had composting set up, we've got a natural pool with, there's no chlorine or salt in that pool. It's just, normal water. I know that you're, Neil, not a fan of the pool because of the maintenance. That's definitely an element, but it looks like a billabong. It's not it's right. It looks like, I call it a water feature you can swim in. And that we've got the in-ground water tank that serves in-ground, that's underneath our veggie patches, that is 20,000 litres, and that serves our toilets. It waters our garden. It fills the pool because it's just natural water, and it also is in the laundry as well. So I feel that all the elements that Neil's talking about is that the building and the structure of the home, but there's other things to think about as well. The design of the home from a floor plan perspective, but then also, the other elements that you're going to have on the site. So I sort of touched on this just before, that it's probably safe to say that I was in charge of the interiors and managing or being on site with the builder. I mean, as Neil said before, we had to really hold our builder's hand throughout the journey. We'd used him before, so we already had a relationship with him, but he'd never built an energy efficient home before, so he didn't understand the materials that we're using. A lot of them he hadn't used before, and he didn't understand the principles. Even the wrap that Neil was talking about, the blanket that cocooned our home. We had to really be on site frequently, and I was pretty much here on a daily basis to check off with him or check what was going on. And so I was managing that build process as well. But Neil, you were in charge of the materials, the construction type, and so forth. So, what are you've already touched on some of the key things that we incorporated, but what are some of the construction materials that we used? We used Hebel, we used, really we used really good windows, the best that we could afford. And I think that goes down to, you're not always going to be able to afford the most expensive windows on the market, and there are a lot of different brands around. They're made out of lots of different materials, but I suppose we used the best that we could afford. Well, let me touch on the interiors then. So from an interiors perspective, for me, it was about using materials that were Green Tag accredited. Now, I'm really lucky to have interviewed the founder of Green Tag, who's going to be on the podcast next week. So you're going to learn all about Green Tag and what that means and how you can use Green Tag accredited products. That was really important for me to make sure that we were using Green Tag accredited products. Window treatments, they go hand in hand with what Neil was talking about with regards to the double glazing, the low E, but window treatments will also act as an amazing thermal insulation and stopping heat coming in and heat going out. So they were a consideration in the window treatments that we chose, the materials that we chose, where we had curtains and so forth. And also low toxic materials, so natural fibers, wool carpets, low VOC paints, minimizing the chemicals that were in the home, particularly ones with VOC in them. So let me ask you then, Neil, can you share with the listeners the environmental features that we use to reduce the energy load in the home?
Yeah, sure. So let's start with the obvious one first. Solar on the roof. Because we had a nice big flat roof, we were able to install heaps of solar panels. And so we made some estimates of proposed energy consumption, and then sized the number of solar panels and their orientation to support that. Actually wish we'd put in more solar panels now, but one day we will. And the hot water as well. So at the time, the heat pump hot water systems were relatively new on the market and still quite expensive. So they still felt a slightly risky investment to me. So we went with an evacuated tube solar hot water system, which has been brilliant. It does have a gas booster. I'm a little bit uncomfortable to say now, to be honest, but the booster is really not used that much at all. Another element that's kind of obvious but does make a big difference is high efficiency lighting, and appliances as well, for that matter. So we had a lighting consultant come in and design the lighting for the house, and having multiple lighting options for all of the zones and different kinds of tasks that you might perform in them. The key requirement that I had from a energy efficiency perspective, apart from the usage of highly efficient LED lighting, was that they should be airtight as well. So and this fed towards the air tightness factor of the house. So yes, we do have ceiling mounted lights where there's holes cut in the plaster sheet to mount the light, but the requirement was to um, source lighting modules that were sealed so that heat couldn't escape from the room up into the roof cavity via the LED lights, so all sealed lights. Another factor that's been important is that even though it's a relatively large home, it's completely zoned, so we're able to individually control the heating or cooling in all of the rooms separately, um, and we're able to close the rooms that are being heated or cooled off with clever use of zoning and sliding doors and so on. What this means is that for the few rare times where we do need to heat or cool, we're not heating or cooling the whole house. We're heating or cooling the room that we're actually occupying at the time. So that really reduces the energy consumption as well. And then finally, the last point is also a no-brainer. Fans. Um, Fans are cheap. Fans are great. They really make a big difference, particularly when it's kind of warm and slightly humid, so your perspiration isn't working as well as it's intended to by nature. Just having a fan on to get a bit of air movement makes such a big difference, and fully 95% of the time where I suppose I'm the one in the house that tends to run a bit hot. Um, 95% of the time, a fan is more than enough. And personally, I find it a bit uncomfortable trying to sleep with an air conditioner on. Um, we we selected fans that had a really slow minimum speed setting, so they're absolutely silent, but just provide that tiniest bit of movement in the air, um, so that I can be comfortable at night, and it just makes for a much better experience. So they're the main features I think that
Yeah.
reduce the energy load.
And on the fans though, they use a significantly less amount of energy than air conditioning.
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So I think
A, a fan is um, tens of watts
yeah, it's
uh, versus
so,
kilowatts for air conditioning. Actually, on that point though, I should point out the other thing that we've found over the years is that running the split system on the dehumidifier mode instead of the cooling mode gives the same results, particularly in conjunction with the fan, um, but uses less than half of the energy.
yeah,
So
that is a
that's a
good one.
good tip.
Yeah, that's a great tip. So I have to admit to the listeners that when we first built, Neil really wanted a fan in the bedroom, and I said no, I want a pendant light. So I went against my own good judgment of having aesthetics over function. So after a couple of years, when it was muggy at night and humid, and it was just, and I don't like sleeping with the air conditioner on either, it was like, okay, let's get that fan in, and I have never looked back. It has been the best decision ever to replace the pendant light with the fan, and I share that story with many clients that it is absolutely well worth having the fan over the pendant light for the aesthetics. So tell me, what are you most proud of about our home?
Look, I think the fact that it's still performing way above average today,
Mm,
after 10 years of operation, is a really strong testament to how well the house works. Oh, I would agree that it's not at passive house standards, but it's still working extremely well.
mm,
Our daily energy consumption is low by any standard. Um, somewhere between 10 and 12 kilowatt hours for those that are interested. So the amount of energy that we're drawing off the grid is low. We have because of the whole house AC system using three-phase, we do have some complexities where we're actually putting more energy off the rooftop solar back into the grid than we can consume. So that is something I'd like to try and change. But nevertheless, our consumption is far lower than average. And also, as I mentioned before, the heating and cooling is hardly being used at all. So the house is performing very well.
Mm.
We built at a time where the standard I think was 6 stars on the NatHERS rating. The house as we designed it was rated at 7.2.
7.5.
7.5 I thought it was. Either way, it's still above average, and even though the standard's recently been lifted up to 7, we're still well above that. The other thing that I'm proud of is that after 10 years, it's still a great living experience. Obviously, the way that we've used the house and the garden continues to evolve as the kids get older and the parents get older as well, I suppose. But the house, because of the good design, the house has been able to change with us as we've matured like fine wine, and continues to provide a level of sanctity and comfort and just ability to get away from it all on a day-to-day basis, which is fantastic. So they're the things that I'm most proud of.
Yeah, and I completely agree with all of those things. It's quite incredible to think that we built this nearly 10 years ago, and it's still a house that is well above standard in terms of energy efficiency and livability than many that are being built today, and particularly with the NATers. So I'll kick off with this, but it's what's the part that you love the most about it? And it might be the same as what you feel you're really proud of. For me, what I still love about the home is that from an interiors perspective, after all this time, I still love the things that I chose. The tiles, the materials, and that's because I chose with my heart and I didn't care what anyone thought, except Neil. I did present tiles and things to Neil, and he was like, well, I don't really care. You decide. Or when he really did have a preference, that was taken on board. You were very good at giving me free rein with the interiors. I see some of the challenges with clients when they've got very strong opinions, and I was very grateful for that because I did have free rein. And even though we didn't like, and even when you didn't like something that much, you said that you didn't really care that much about it either. So ultimately, I ended up doing what I wanted pretty much. But I think it comes back to something that I say time and time again, and that is that I chose with my heart. Many of the materials that I chose were things that had been on the market for years. They were classic design, the tile designs, the Patricia Erkloer, and things like that had been around for a long time. And I suppose I'd always had them on my radar as when we build our forever home, these are the things, these are the tiles, these are the materials I want in my home. So I don't tire of them because I always love them. So I say it to you all the time in these episodes. I say it to my clients all the time, choose with your heart. But I can absolutely confirm that when you do choose with your heart, you will not tire of it because you've loved it for so long. And I do remember, though, that if I go back to some of the things that when we were going through the selections, I do remember that you really loved some basins. You're like, oh, I just really love these. And I made those work in the ensuite. I wasn't that fussed about it. So it's like, okay, I'll choose the tiles and Neil can choose the basin. And I have to share this story too, because I also remember Neil came home a couple of times with pictures of pendants. This is when he was still going into the city each day, and there was an interior store across the road from where he worked. It was a little bit dangerous, I think, but he came home and he said, "Oh, I really, really like this light." And he sort of just put the paper on the table. "I really like it." And that was it. And it was a disco ball. It was this big, massive prism of crystals in a round format. And I went, okay, yep, we'll make that work. We'll make that work. And that's now hanging in our stairwell. A couple of months later, Neil comes home with another picture. "I really like this light." Same shop. I was like, okay. And this was a 3-tiered mirrored upside down wedding cake light. Huge, really beautiful. But it wasn't what I had in my mind was going to go over the dining table. And I thought, well, this is a massive light. It's never going to go anywhere else. But I'd already chosen the pendant lights for the kitchen island bench that I'd actually chosen before we even started designing. I saw them at a trade show. I absolutely fell in love with them, and I had to have them. And Neil hated them, and I thought, well, here I am choosing these lights in our kitchen. He really doesn't like them. He showed me his 3-tiered upside down wedding cake mirrored light. I thought, well, we'll make it work. So, but what I love is he came home with things that he really loved, and I thought, I have to make these things work. I could tell he really made them. He really, really loved them. So that's where the compromises came in. He chose things that he really loved with lighting. Neil's passionate about lighting. So I'm really glad that we could incorporate those things as well.
And I still love them.
Yeah, and I do too. I do too. So it just goes to show all the other stuff he wasn't that interested in. But when there were things that he showed me that he really loved, I knew they were really important to him, and I really had to make them work. And I was okay with that. So let me come down to the advice, because I suppose we're talking about how we designed our house, what mattered to us, and how we chose things that we did. But you are highly educated and knowledgeable in this field. So what advice would you give listeners about to embark on designing and building a new home? And energy efficiency and sustainability are key objectives for them. What should they focus on the most? What are the top, if they could take 3 things away, the top 3 things that are going to provide the most impact? And I think you've alluded to them already, but just give 3 that are going to give the biggest impact.
Sure. Well, I'm going to sound a bit bolshy about this, but the first thing I'd want to say is that nowadays sustainability and energy efficiency should be everyone's key objective. And the fact is, here we are at the tail end of 2022, the difference in build cost between building to the current standards and building to passive house is actually really low, and it's reducing all the time.
Yeah.
So the truth is, if you are in a position to be able to build a house at all, nowadays, you're certainly able to do it properly. So that's number one. The second bit of advice I'd say that's critical is to arm yourself with some knowledge before engaging designers or architects. We found ourselves, 10 years ago, we'd go around and interview architects and mention that we were interested in sustainability, and they'd say water tank, or they'd say LED lights, and that was it.
Double glazing.
Double glazing, maybe, yeah. Rarely all 3 at once, though. So by spending a bit of time prepping yourself and getting some knowledge, you're better able to have informed conversations and make good decisions. Make good decisions about choosing who's the right partner for you to help design and build the house. And also along the way, there's always going to be decisions coming up. So again, making the right decisions that get the correct balance between lived experience and efficiency and cost and whatever other factors are in play. Knowledge is key. And here I'd say, if nothing else, start with yourhome.gov.au. It's a fantastic resource. You can read it all online, or you can buy the book for minimal price. But spend the time just reading through that. You'll have so much more knowledge and be able to have proper conversations with your specialists and be able to make better decisions.
It's an awesome resource, and I'll put the link in the show notes.
Great. And finally, the last thing I'd say is it's going to be better for your budget and for the planet as well to do things right the first time.
Yeah.
So I'd say build to passive house standards. Don't choose gas appliances. Optimize your roofing layout for solar PV, solar panels, and design the solar system as if you were going off grid. So install the batteries and install an electric vehicle charger. Doesn't matter whether you've got an EV today or not. In the next 2 or 3 years, they're going to be so prevalent. Everyone's going to be wanting chargers. So it just makes sense to build these things in from the get-go.
Well, you're future-proofing. And I mean, I talk about it all the time. And we are getting a battery. It was so cost prohibitive when we built, but that is definitely, I mean, you've alluded to it anyway, but that's definitely something we'll be looking at. So future-proof. And if you're not even going to be installing the solar panels immediately, provision for it so that you can, you know, if it's not in the budget initially, if you provision for it, you know that you're able to future-proof and get them installed later. My final question, if you had your time over again, what would you change about our home, if anything, in terms of the design and build?
It wasn't possible back in 2010 for a number of reasons. 2013,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, for a number of reasons. But I really wish we had built a passive house.
Yeah.
You know, back then, 10 years ago, the information about passive house just wasn't on the web, and there weren't books. So getting the knowledge to be able to understand it and understand what it meant was nigh on impossible back then. Yes, there were specialists, even in Australia. There would have been a handful, but they didn't have a web presence. It wasn't known. It wasn't well talked about. But that's my number one regret, is I wish we'd built a passive house. The other one, just to sink the boot in, I suppose, is I regret installing a gas cooktop and the gas feature fireplace.
Yeah.
They seemed like good choices at the time, but given how rapidly the whole climate change thing has really gone from nowhere to being fully in our faces in that short space of time that we've lived here, I wish we had never installed gas at all.
I agree, and I think that we were used to gas cooking, so we just kept it in, and the fireplace seemed like a nice aesthetic to have at the time. But look, we haven't lost the chance to build again. That's our dream. For listeners, it is our dream to go off grid one day and build a passive house and build without any gas.
With SIPs.
Yeah, with SIPs. And do all the things that we've been passionate about for all this time, but we're just not able. All the challenges that we had and the brick walls that we came up against, I suppose. And I just think about all the different materials that we could be using, both from an exterior perspective, but also internally, that weren't available at the time. But look, we did the best that we could at the time, and I still think we've created a pretty amazing house, not only from a floor plan perspective. I'm proud that we use every space. There's no wasted space in this home. But just, I think we should still be really proud of what we've achieved.
Oh, absolutely. It's living here is a day-to-day joy. There's no other way to put it.
I'm glad that you're that happy with it.
I'm glad I am too.
So thank you so much for coming on. I know that you're very private. I was keying listeners up for the fact that I was able to get you to join me today, and I really appreciate your time. It's time out of your day and sharing your knowledge, because I'm always in awe of just how much information you have and what you know, and how it's benefited how this house was designed, just with the research that you did. And it's extraordinary what you know, and I am in awe of what you know. So thank you for sharing it today.
Oh, shucks. Well, thanks for having me on the program, Frances. It's been good to have a chat.
Thank you. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of My Forever Home. If you're ready to renovate or build a new home and you need help to create a beautiful and functional forever home, you can book a chat with me directly at whitepebbleinteriors.com.au/chat. Have a great day.